Files, Sunday, only on NewsNation.
All right. As we've been reporting, over 1 million people today were ordered to evacuate from the northern part of Gaza as the Israeli military is thought to be preparing a ground invasion into that area. The situation is turning into what's been described by a number of international organizations as a humanitarian crisis for civilians in Gaza as the Israeli strikes in that area continue today. The area has been under near constant bombardment from the air, no electricity, no water, limited access to food and medical supplies. The UN actually warned the region is becoming a, quote, hellhole on the brink of collapse. Here with more perspective on what the people there are experiencing is Mustafa Barghouti, is Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. So, sir, it's good to have your perspective on all of this. You know, the Palestinian National Initiative, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to establish where you're coming from, is a kind of a third way in Palestinian politics, which has been, at least from what I read, against Fatah, against Hamas, kind of carving your own path and things. So with that as a backdrop, let me begin in Gaza with these evacuations. You're in the West Bank in Ramallah, but have you been able to be in contact with anybody in Gaza to see how things are actually going today? What do you know?
Of course, we are in touch with our people there because we run a huge medical operation there in my capacity as a medical doctor. And the situation is totally drastic. And let me say, frankly, that Israel is committing really a horrible war crime there by forcing people out of their homes. And not only forcing the people out of their homes, but also demolishing these homes one after the other. Imagine the situation if some occupying power came to New York and told every citizen that they should leave their homes and go out to somewhere else, and then demolished every house, every school, every university, every hospital, every clinic. That is the situation that people face there. Yep. In addition to airstrikes that are so vicious and savage that today they claim that they're forcing people out for their safety, but just an hour ago, one of the Israeli airstrikes bombarded one of the convoys of the people who were leaving their homes and killed 60 people and injured no less than 300 people.
Well, I talked to the Israelis earlier in the show. The spokesperson from the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, was our guest, as you are now. And I asked them about all of this. They, quite the contrary to saying that they're committing a war crime, they say they're following the rules of armed conflict by ordering, or at least heavily suggesting, that these people evacuate an area that's not going to be safe. So I asked this spokesperson where those people would go. I want to play for you what he said, and then you can react to it. Here it is.
Absolutely.
Indeed, a tall order, indeed not an ideal situation, but it is feasible, and it is far better than any other option if they stay. If they stay, that would be much worse.
So his point, Dr. Barghouti, is that this is the best option available, that Israel was attacked by Hamas. They have to go in there to protect themselves, and the best option they have is to tell these people to evacuate the northern part of Gaza. You say?
So they tell them to evacuate and then bombard them on the way. But that's more. There is something more than that. The Gaza Strip is the most densely populated area in the world. 2.3 million people living only in 140 square miles. 70% of them, by the way, are refugees who were kicked out by Israel in 1948. These people, 1.1 million people, are supposed to go down. So there will be 2.3 million people in a very small area. And then the Israeli bombardment will continue, and the demolishing of houses and structures will continue in the south, and people then will be evicted to Egypt. This is the real plan of Mr. Netanyahu, which he didn't hide. And this is the plan that the Israeli military spokesperson spoke about. So we are talking here not only about humanitarian crisis, not only about a war crime, we are talking here about another war crime and a serious violation of international law, where Palestinians will be evicted in an act of ethnic cleansing in the 21st century.
Let me ask you, if you want to talk about violations of international law, let me start at the beginning and get your thoughts on the broader conflict here. What Hamas did, starting on Saturday, October 7th, What is your reaction to that? Because as I introduced you, I said your organization is basically presenting itself as a third way in Palestinian politics, not necessarily supporting Fatah, not necessarily in the past supporting Hamas. Your comments today make it look like you would be supportive, but I find it hard to believe someone in your position would be supporting a group of terrorists going into a nation and murdering children and babies and all the rest, everything that we saw earlier this week. So you're not supportive of that, are you?
No, I am so well known for being the person who's advocating nonviolence more than anybody else.
So what do you say about what Hamas has done?
Let me finish my sentence, please. I was nominated for Nobel Peace Prize specifically for these positions. We are against any killing of any civilian, but when I advocate protecting Palestinian children and Palestinian women who are now being evicted from their homes, that doesn't mean that I am supporting the attack on other women or other children. That is unacceptable. And it shouldn't happen neither to Palestinians nor to Israelis.
Right.
But the core reality, which everybody ignores today, is that the root problem of everything we are facing today is the continuation of Israeli illegal occupation of Palestinian land, an occupation that has transformed into a system of apartheid. It is not just me, it's Mr. Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who says that what Israel did by establishing this blockade, preventing water, electricity, medical supplies, and food is nothing but a violation of international law.
But if that's your cause, and I understand it has been, I've heard you and others speak about it for years and years, didn't Hamas, through their own actions, set that cause back? Didn't they set you back in what you're hoping to accomplish by the way that they've acted and conducted themselves? Isn't it working against your own interests?
Any violation of human rights, any violation of civil rights, any violation of and the attacks on civilians sets us all back. But I think the two persons that are largely responsible, and I'm glad that I'm speaking to an American outlet, are Mr. Biden and Mr. Blinken, who insisted all the last 3 years that they will not engage in any kind of peace process to resolve this conflict before it exploded as we see it today. They kept saying that time is not proper, is not appropriate, and they didn't engage. Now they speak about releasing the Israeli prisoners. I want to alert you to something very dangerous that is happening. By Netanyahu refusing to have ceasefire and continuing to bombard Gaza, he has already killed 11 of these Israeli prisoners in Gaza. And he cannot save the rest of the people, including the American Israelis, unless Israel stops the bombardment, accepts a ceasefire, and allows an exchange of prisoners. So these people can come back home safely instead of bombarding the place with Israeli airstrikes, so that these prisoners would be killed. I don't understand the logic.
Well, we're trying to have as many conversations as we possibly can. This is a very tense time with very strongly held feelings by people like you who have been involved in this for many, many years. We thank you for coming on today to share your point of view, and hopefully we can continue the conversation as this war continues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.